Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This is Rhonda Seelinger, and I am the Faculty Advocate and Event Manager for iClicker, and we just want to thank you so much for joining us today. We are just about ready to get started. Before we do, I just have a couple of quick things I wanted to share. First, I just want to let you know that everyone is automatically muted, and we do that just to help keep out the background noise. It doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you, because we absolutely do. And how we do that is we communicate via the chat feature. So if you have any questions or comments you want to make, definitely feel free to do that. I'll be monitoring those throughout the presentation, and I promise we will do our best to address everyone's questions and comments. I also want to let you know that we are recording the webinar, and we will send a link to the recording within the next day or so. Feel free to share that with a colleague or anybody that you think might be interested. And with those things covered, I am very pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Kevin Revell of Murray State University. He's been teaching with a flipped style classroom for quite some time, and we are very excited and grateful to have him present his experience and strategies. Kevin, I'll let you take it from here.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Rhonda. Hi, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Hello from sunny West Kentucky here, and I hope that your semesters are going along well. I'm looking forward to talking today about flipped learning. Hopefully, we're not overpromising a little bit with flipped learning being easy and effective. Some days it's not that easy, but there are a number of tricks that we can take and use that will hopefully help you get into more active learning techniques, and hopefully you can come away with something that will help you out in your classroom as well. So thank you for being here today, and let's get going. So as I'm going to go ahead and close out so you don't have to look at me the whole time, but as we get started, this is me. I teach in the Department of Chemistry at Murray State in West Kentucky. I teach mainly introductory chemistry, which is our non-majors or peripheral science majors, and then I usually teach organic, which is usually our sophomore or junior level chemistry as well. And I've been involved with active learning techniques and methodologies in a number of different formats, and so hopefully what I can share today, while I'll talk about some specific chemistry examples, hopefully it's something that will be broadly applicable to your classes. And I know from looking at kind of the list of attendees that there are a lot of different disciplines represented here today. So hopefully I can offer some things that will be helpful to you as well. So we begin with the real challenge. You know, why are we here? Why do we do this? And that's to help students succeed. I think all of us are in education because we want to see students be able to meet their goals. And so we begin with this fundamental question: how can I improve student success? And there's been a lot of ideas and a lot of thinking about this, and in recent years more research about this. And the research is starting to show a couple of clear trends. One of those is that the use of active learning is really essential for performance. My examples here are from STEM, but of course in most disciplines you get better at something not just by reading or not just by listening, but by actually doing. Other studies have shown that in building more structure, building more active learning into a class decreases the achievement gap, so that students from disadvantaged backgrounds make up more ground in that type of format. And in fact, this has trickled up to the point to where major research bodies or education bodies are really promoting building more active learning techniques within classes. So today, we're going to look at one particular active learning approach, but this is not the only one. You've got the process-oriented, guided inquiry learning, peer-led team learning, a lot of times kind of a mixed martial arts that sort of combines all of these. But today I'm really going to focus on the flipped classroom and what can we do within this paradigm to build those active learning environments, build environments whereby students can gain more while they're in class. And also, how do we make that a little bit easier? What are some tricks that we can use to make that both easy and effective as we go. So I'm looking forward to sharing those with you. I know a lot of you probably have some experience with flipped classrooms already. If you'll indulge me just for a minute, for anyone who's kind of new to flipped and still trying to get their brain around it, I wanted to just briefly give a little bit of an overview. The traditional approach to learning is that the content delivery happens in class, and then outside of class is where practice occurs. So students listen to a lecture in class, they go out of class and they work practice problems or examples or write or whatever the case may be. Flip says, let's take that and reverse it. Let's do the content delivery outside of class, usually in the form of videos, although not absolutely necessary. And then let's build in class, let's begin to build the practice element so that when we have a professor there or a teacher there, someone who can actually help the students and work with the students, they have that help while they're actually practicing, and take the really unidimensional aspect of content delivery outside of class. And it makes for, I think, better use of class time. Now, that's kind of the basic concept, but I would think of it a little bit differently. I would really think of it in terms of what happens before class, in class, and after class. And this has become kind of an organizational mantra for me over the last couple of years. And so traditionally, before class, okay, theoretically, you might have a few overachieving students that would read the material before class. I'm going to go ahead and come out and admit that I was not one of those students. I never did that. Once we get into class, though, that's where the content delivery occurs. You have the lecture, and then after class, the students begin to practice this. One of the things that the flipped does is by bringing the content delivery before class, it really creates more time and more emphasis on practice, not only in class, but also after class. So I would argue that there are some advantages to doing this, one, just in terms of the amount of practice that students are able to get, and two, in terms of having the content delivery where they can think about it. One of the things that doing the content delivery before class also does is it allows you to chunk your material more effectively, break it down into bite-sized pieces. I was one of those students that tended to work hard, but I had a very hard time paying attention in class. And so for me, after the first 10 minutes, a lot of times I was gone. Well, if something was said, I missed it, and tough tacos. It's gone, and I'm not going to have a chance to go back and get it. One of the things that I've seen is that by doing the content delivery online, students can break it down into smaller pieces, and they can go back and get it again if they don't get it the first time. So I would argue that you're really expanding not only practice but also content delivery. Here's a case in point. This is a graph of my lecture videos and the number of times that they were viewed over the last month. Now, I post my materials to Vimeo. I like Vimeo because it's a little bit cleaner. It doesn't compress the images so that it's easier for students to see. Also, there are fewer cat videos and stuff like that to distract students once they're in and going. And then I also like it that I can go in and kind of track what students are doing. Well, if I look at this number of views by date, I say, okay, I had class on the 22nd. I have a Monday, Wednesday class is a big section, so a lot of what we're seeing is kind of a weekly, approximately, depending on what we were doing, surge in number of views. But then at the end, right before the exam, I've got a lot of students going back and re-watching this. So I'm, in a sense, getting more bang for my buck. I'm getting these lectures and these content elements delivered more than I would otherwise by posting these up. This is kind of interesting. It's interesting to track and see how much things are actually being used. So given that background on flipped, let's go in and take a look then at three big questions. And this centers around the theme of how do we actually build a flipped course? What can we do to make this course manageable and make it effective? And really, I think your three big questions deal with three issues. One, course design. Two, what do we do in class? And then three, video and technology. as we're talking about these items, I would like for you to think of this as a buffet. I'm not so much going to dive into one single idea or single rigid way of doing this. Rather, I'm going to give you a number of different ideas that you can choose from as you go through this. Excuse me just for 1 second. So if you see an idea you like, if you like the General Tso's, try the General Tso's. If you like the cashew chicken, try the cashew chicken. Whatever it is out of this that works for you, I encourage you to take this and view the rest of this presentation kind of as a grab bag of ideas that you can draw from, and hopefully you'll have something that will be useful for you. So let's begin with course design. There are a number of different kind of ways that we can go at the course design from the outset. One of the first things that you may want to think about is the idea of a soft flip versus a full flip. I started within my classes really just trying to build active learning pieces. So for example, I've got some organic structures here where I would say, I would build a slide like this into the middle of my lectures and say, all right, guys, we've been talking about this. Now I want you to take a few minutes, gang up in groups, and see if you can work these 3 or 4 problems. And that gave me a few minutes to mill around the room. It breaks it up in terms of lecture. It puts them on the spot, makes them really become active about doing it. The challenge to this is that it takes time. It's going to take a few minutes for students to work through this, for me to get around and answer questions. And so if I have a semester where every moment is calendared for content delivery, I don't have as much time to do this. So one of the things I began looking to do as I sort of put my toe in the water with flipped learning was to take pieces of content and put them online, put them in video format so that I could carve out enough time to do more of this sort of active pedagogy in class. And I still, with my organic classes, use this formula quite a bit. I've become much more deliberate about saying, okay, in every class, I don't want to be talking for more than 20 minutes if I can help it. I want students to be working problems. I want them to engage with the material as we go through it. In other classes, though, I've gone with the full flip and said, okay, we're going to take this class, the entire content of this class, the entire lecture content is online, and when we come to class, we're going to practice. And so with those classes, like my intro, notice I build into, and this is my Canvas course shell, I'll build in a before class piece. Here's what you need to do before you get to class. Here's your video links that you need to follow. Here's a pre-class quiz. And then what are we going to do in class, and then what are we going to do after class? And this has really been an effective framework for me as I go at this. Now, a couple of details as we think about this in terms of a full flip class. The video or the text, and this can vary depending on what text you're working with, what discipline you're working in, how exactly this looks for you. Notice for me, I've said read sections 5.1 to 5.3 or watch the videos below. And I've really built that thinking about different learning styles. I have some students who are going to really get it by reading it, and they may not need the lecture as much at all. I have other students who are very much auditory listeners, or auditory learners, excuse me, and they kind of struggle with the reading. So what I've tried to do is to build my own lectures that match really tightly with the content so that students can use whichever one or both that they want. And then the pre-class quiz says, okay, have you engaged with the content? Have you incorporated these ideas into what you're doing? And then they're ready to go for class. Now, one thing about doing this, you have got to have student buy-in. How do you get students to actually watch the videos before class? Well, there's 2 things that I found that are really important. One is what I've got right here. You have to have a quiz right at the beginning. And my quiz questions are usually low level. There's the sort of thing where if a student has read the material or has watched the video lectures, they will be able to answer this question. This is not a demanding technical question. It's a low-level knowledge question. Did you watch it? We'll wait until we get into class to really hit the high-end stuff. The other thing I would say with this approach is it is really helpful if you sell it hard at the beginning of the year. I walk into class my first day and say, guys, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do what we call a flipped class, and I'll kind of explain to them what the concept is and explain to them why I'm doing it. The reason that I do this is because I've seen a lot of evidence that more people learn, that people learn more effectively, that people learn more when they can take it in small bites. And so I'm doing this. One, it will keep you on track. Two, it gives you more of a chance to ask me questions. Rather than you being stuck in your room trying to figure out the answer to this problem, you can be working these problems when I'm right here to help you. And that creates a camaraderie with the course and helps them understand that, okay, this is something that's being done to help them. And then from there, the buy-in is much easier. Okay, any questions so far? You guys doing okay? All right, terrific. Well, let's roll on then. The second question comes about when we get into the in-class pedagogy, and I think one of the questions that you have to ask right out of the gate is, what does my class look like? Flipping a class is going to look different for a class like this than it is for a class like this. If you have a big class or a small class, that changes the dynamic. How much can you interact with students individually, saying, here, let's work some problems, here, let's look at specific examples, let's discuss this. It just changes the whole dynamic. I think another thing that changes, and this kind of correlates with class size, is the course level. Is this an upper level class where students are mostly going to be more engaged? Are they in their discipline, in their wheelhouse, what they're interested in? Or is this a non-majors where you're really wanting to keep them, fighting to keep their interest and keep their engagement when they may not naturally want to be engaged? Do you have teaching assistants working with you? This is something that's being used a lot in large lecture classes, to have some graduate students who are there to help facilitate the problem-solving process. It's something I've played with a little bit, but I'm usually kind of in that middle ground where I'm just big enough to make it challenging, but not so big that we can afford a teaching assistant. So that's that's something to definitely think about, though. Is this something where you might have a graduate student helping you, or more than one graduate student, depending on the size of your classes? The other thing that really comes into play as you get into the in-class pedagogy is, how do we make the pre-class material and the in-class material mesh? And candidly, this was one of the things that scared me the most when I started into the flipped process, because I had my lecture shtick down. I had the jokes, I had the stories, I had the analogies. I knew how to run it and make it work pretty well. So taking those beautiful lectures I had developed and putting them online in a format that's sometimes a little drier, and then walking into class without that material was a little bit scary. And so I really had to, I kind of cycled back and forth a few times as I was thinking through the process of what this looks like. But this is one of the questions you really have to ask is, all right, I've taken all that great material I've relied on for years, put it online. Now what do I do when I walk into class? I'm going to share a couple of ideas of things that have worked for me. Do you want to do an in-class polling or something like that? Do you want to do a group projects or group work? And again, I would argue that depends on the specifics of your class. As an example, I teach two classes. I usually teach Organic 1, which is pre-med majors, very motivated students, sophomores and juniors, typically 40 to 50 students in a class. It's a terrific class. Usually we do group problems, we do activities, we do speed drills, and frankly, for a lot of those classes, those three kind of approaches meet all of my needs. However, when I'm teaching intro, I've got a totally different dynamic. I've got a larger group, 70 to 140. It's typically a lot more freshmen and peripheral science majors, so students who are much more resistant to chemistry out of the gate than the students that I have in organic. They're much more timid about speaking up and much more timid about saying, hey, I don't get this at all, can you help me? a lot of times more math difficulties and so forth. So I have to approach this class a little bit differently. I still use the three elements that I kind of mentioned before, but I rely a lot more heavily on online polling in the intro class. I find with my organic class, I can say, okay, show of hands, where are you guys at? Or just tell me where you're at, and they'll usually tell me. With intro, I really have to have the polling. I have to have a way of keeping students accountable, and they can do that using either a clicker system or a phone system, and I'll show you what I'm using specifically. So with the polling questions, I usually try to build varying levels of difficulty. I primarily use multiple choice or numerical, although there are a few other options that you can go with. And typically these are graded. Now, depending on which system you like and how you want to approach this, some people will do participation only, others will do graded correct or incorrect, or some hybrid between them. I usually use a correct or incorrect, but I could see arguments for any of the approaches. Here's how my questions usually look. So in class, I will come into class with a set of problems. Sometimes we'll work through some practice problems related to the lecture. I'll use either PowerPoint or a program called Drawboard PDF that allows me to annotate on a tablet that I really like. And then when I get to an opportunity to do a polling question, I'll do a couple things. One, I put the little reef icon up here in the left on each slide where I'm going to do this. And this is a reminder to me, oh yeah, don't forget this is a polling question. Now for this one it's kind of obvious. There are other questions where maybe it's a numerical answer, where if I'm not thinking about that I might just start into solving the problem with the students. But this reminds me, okay, put this up for a poll. So I use the Reef polling app, which is connected with iClicker, and with this app students get the polling on their phones, and the questions go right out to their phones. So what I'll do is this little icon will hover over my PowerPoint slide, and this is just a stationary image, but you get the idea. So I've got my PowerPoint slide on top, and then I've got the Reef polling icon that hovers over top of it, and I'll click on polling, and when I do, I'll get a little drop-down menu, and I can say, do I want multiple choice, short answer, numeric, or target? I'll select which one I want, in this case a multiple choice, and then hit go. When I hit go, it will allow me to see, one, the number of responders, and two, how much time has passed. So I typically will give students a heads up, hey, we've got about 10 seconds left, so anyone who has still been thinking about it can go ahead and enter in a final answer. And then once I get the answers in, I can either kind of go through the answer with them, or sometimes come down to results, and that will show me the distribution of responses I get. I'll show you an example of that here in just a minute. Another example of kind of a multiple choice question that I could use. Again, just select A through E, and let's talk about that. Another example from my intro classes of a question. One of the things that I can even do with a question like this is build in animation sequences, so that if I know I'm going to go through the answer, once we've talked through it, I can say, okay, let's talk through this answer and actually build out that animation sequence. Depending on the class and on the day, sometimes I'll do that by annotation with a tablet, but sometimes just running it off PowerPoint is nice because I know what the answer is going to be. The other thing that I see with chemistry is that we have so many questions that are set up very similarly that if I build that animation one time, I can pretty well cut and paste and help everybody walk through. We do have other formats for questions. So, for example, one of the things I could have done is just to not have the multiple choice box and just have this be a numerical response. And I will do that some if I want to see really where my students are. Another option, and this is one that I haven't used much, but is what we would call a target response or a heat map. So in this type of question, students would get this image on their phone, and they're going to just touch a particular area on the phone. Well, when I go in to select whether it's correct or not, for example, the answer to this question is to select this large rounded peak here. I'm going to say, okay, anyone who touched within this box, within this region, has the correct answer. And so that's kind of a nice change of pace from multiple choice. And a lot of times if you've got something where you've got the possibility of some misconceptions and you can put it in a graphical format. It's a little more open-ended. I think students like this type of question a lot, and it's sometimes revealing to you to see where were they selecting? Were they out over here all the time, or did they get it mixed up with one of these peaks? What's going on here as they're thinking about it? One of my favorite things as I'm walking through these clicker questions with students is once in a while I'll get a response like this. Now, again, if you're not a chemistry person, don't worry about the question here. The correct answer is D. And this was a question from my intro class a couple of semesters ago, but it illustrates a trick that I use quite a bit. So I did my polling, and when I hit results, I got this. I got a distribution of answers. The primary answer chosen was actually not correct. The correct answer is D. What I have an opportunity to do then is to be all, go with the Regis Philbin thing and say, hey, is that your answer? Is that your final answer? Why don't you take a minute, talk to the people next to you. We're going to re-vote on this in just a second. This is fun because what you'll have is all of a sudden the classroom kind of erupts into all these little conversations, and I'll walk around and listen, and people are explaining to each other. So all of a sudden, without me having to go through and explain it again, this is putting students in the position of having to articulate to each other what the correct answer is, and that's valuable. One, for I think for the student explaining it. Two, for the student hearing it, getting a different perspective, and sometimes one where you don't have the curse of knowledge of somebody who's been doing this for 20 years. And sometimes it's good for me to even hear how a student who mostly gets it explains it to a student who doesn't. So after we had a minute and everybody had talked, I said, okay, let's re-vote. And I throw it up for votes again, and boom, all of a sudden the number of correct answers jumps up quite a bit. I find this really, really gratifying when I can move the dial from this to this without me having to teach it one more time. Let them teach it. All right, everybody doing okay? Any questions popping up?
Yes, there was a question. It was really more about the sequence of when you introduce your videos. For example, like say you're starting a new chapter or a new unit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you haven't talked about it in class yet. You haven't assigned anything. What is your thought process there?
That's a good question. So I do all of the topic introduction by video. Now there may be some different schools of thought on that, and I think different disciplines have different needs. Sometimes you have a discipline where you're going to watch something that's related to a topic that you've introduced. For me, I'm introducing the topic in the video lectures, and then when I come into class, one of the things I have to be real careful about is not to say, yeah, here's what you don't do. Don't say, okay, how many of you watched the videos? And if half the people raise their hand, say, okay, well, this is what was in the video. At that point, you've just shot yourself in the foot for the rest of the semester. You really have to kind of enforce it. And so I've become very deliberate about using the term video lecture. Okay, guys, I trust you saw the video lecture before class. Just a quick overview, and I'll do a 1 or 2 minute overview of the main ideas. But if students, and this sounds a little bit rough, but if students haven't done that, then they're kind of left scrambling for that day. But I think that by doing that overall, it sort of forces that discipline of watching the videos, watching the lessons before they come to class, and I think it makes it more effective in the long run than not.
Great, thanks. We also
okay.
just had a comment, and it's that someone likes to re-poll without the student seeing the answer and asking them to discuss.
Oh yeah, that's kind of fun too. Yeah, I've done that as well. But one thing I have noticed is that sometimes along those lines, my class this semester has been very perceptive that if the majority answer is C, everyone who didn't select C will just dogpile onto C, and then all of a sudden everyone selected C, and just because it's the majority opinion. And so it's kind of nice to do this, one, if there's not if like in this example where D was not the majority opinion, sometimes I'll say, okay, the answer everyone chose is wrong. Figure out why. I appreciate that comment though about doing that without showing the results. I think that's really helpful.
And one more question: do all your students have cell phones?
That is a good question, and that is something that I have worried about. And I've done this for a couple of years now, and I always say, okay, if you have any trouble with getting this, let me know. I do have some students who will do this. You can do this on a tablet or on a computer. And so I have had students who run on their computer because they're running a slightly older version phone. I have never had a student say, I don't have any device that I could use. And I've tried to make it as clear as I can that if you have a device limitation, if you don't have a device, let me know. We'll get that for you. Because you can run with Read, you can run clickers hybrid, so you could hand a clicker to a student if you wanted to, and so that they would have something to work with. We're in West Kentucky. We're not in a wealthy area by any stretch, but we haven't had that be an issue at all. I was a little surprised. I was concerned about that early on.
Great, thanks.
Okay, sure. Well, let me show you one or two more kind of quick ideas here as we roll through this. This one's one of my favorites, and this is just an in-class activity that I've found to be really helpful. And I think this is true for a lot of different subjects, that there are some things that are just low-level knowledge that you have to have in order to function with the higher material. So, for example, within chemistry, if you don't know your formulas and your charges for your ions, you can't name larger chemical compounds. You can't solve higher level problems down the road because you lack that fundamental alphabet, that fundamental vocabulary that you start with. So one of the things that I've started doing, and I think it's just terribly fun, is to build what I call speed drills in. And anytime there's an element that students need to just know, just need to have foundationally, I'll use this slide as kind of my prompt. I've actually embedded lowrider in this slide a time or two, and said, all right, get out a piece of paper, number 1 to 10 or number 1 to 25 as it might be. Get ready. And once everybody's got their paper out and they're numbered, I'm going to put questions up, and I've built an animation sequence where we can run through really quickly. And it's kind of a drag racing theme, but the idea is the question's going to appear and be gone. So write the symbol in charge on these ions. And I'll give it about 3 seconds and fade to the next one. Fade to the next one. Fade to the next one. And done. I always do it in sets of 5 like this. And so the question appears and it's gone. And the idea is you need to know this well enough that you can respond quickly. I never grade these. These are for students to assess how they're doing. We'll hit another set. And again, I know I'm not talking to a chemistry audience here necessarily, but these will pop up. I'll give them maybe a little bit longer than this, depending on the level of the question. But they need to be able to go through, recognize it, and write it quickly. For anything that's even like a foreign language or anything that's real vocabulary driven, this is a great way to kind of drive home that foundational knowledge. Once we've run through all 10, or all 25 as it might be, then I'll go back and say, okay, let's look at what the answers were for these. And I'll scroll through the answers pretty quickly with a little bit of explanation for each one. And then finally I'll end with a question. And depending on which class I've got and kind of how they're geared, sometimes I'll do this as a polling question. Sometimes I'll just put it out there for them. But how many of those did you get correct? And then follow up. What did you struggle with? Of those sets, for example, if I have 5 different kind of types of questions that I'm giving, which ones of those did you struggle with the most? This gives students a chance and kind of encourages them to practice metacognition, if you will, this to really say, what do I know and what do I not know? And that's something that a lot of students struggle to do. So this is something that I've become more and more fond of as I've gone along. Any other questions there?
Yes. What you sort of have touched on this, but how do you deal with students who still don't get the correct answer? And maybe you could talk a little bit about, well, you kind of touched on it, the grading, how you grade these.
Right. Well, for the speed drills, I For the speed drills, I never grade those. For the in-class participation, and there are a few different approaches. Some people give participation points. What I do is I say, no, the question is right or wrong, but in order to get full credit for participation, I need you to get 60% of the questions right. Now, what that does is it frees students up to where if their phone dies that day or they forget their phone, you know, if they're hitting the other days and they're consistent with it, they're going to be fine. And so I usually, you know, give full credit at 60% and then prorate it back from there. And so I've found that that usually works out pretty well and keeps students engaged. I want it to be engaging. I want there to be some points, but it also needs to be low stakes to where they're not afraid to get it wrong.
Right, and my apology, I don't know that I did this question justice. I think he was talking about in the example where you you have an initial poll, say some kids get it wrong, and then they meet as groups, then you re-poll. I think he means after the re-poll.
After the re-poll?
If they're still getting it wrong,
yeah,
strategy there.
At some point, so usually what I've seen is that it moves it towards the correct answer. At the same time, at some point you kind of have to go on. I can't stay at the train station until every last person gets on board. So usually, if I'm at a point where I've got about 80% of the class getting it or 90%, I'll say, okay, if you're still struggling with this, catch me afterwards. I'll be happy to go through this with you. But we need to move on. Because what I've found is that I'm never going to get to 100% on anything. So I'm really kind of trying to play to the middle there, and it's easy to get hung up trying to get those last 3 people on board when everyone else is bored. So that's kind of a challenge.
Yeah, well, it helps the students, I think, know where they need to maybe brush up on the topic. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm watching my time. Let me quickly run through just a couple of ideas pertaining to the third thing, which is video and tech. And I think a lot of times this can be one of the biggest challenges for people. And that's, how do I make my video content effective and engaging? And as a subtext to that, without spending my whole life doing it. So I will go ahead and confess that I'm spending my whole life doing this. This is the biggest time consumer that I have, is building these slides out. Now, I tend to do slides like this. I like them simple and clean. I don't put my face on them or anything like that. Pretty much what you're seeing now is pretty well how I present. Other people really like that personal connection, and so the model of Walter Cronkite talking with the information on the board behind him, and of course this is carried through in television, to today. This kind of approach and style. I have my son is a sophomore in high school, and he's got a terrific history teacher this year that does this, where he'll put his face in the corner, and so you're seeing him if you need to have a connection of something, but it's mostly got a slide, and he's building questions in along through the video, which is a pretty sophisticated approach to take. The TED Talk is kind of a fancy way of doing it. That's something that's probably above my production capability. Sometimes there are resources that are out there that you can draw from, and some of them are lavishly produced and really slick. I've tended to stay away from those. I tend to, and that kind of depends on the discipline, but I tend to, with something like this, maybe be so mesmerized by the artwork that I'm not hearing the content. And so I find simpler is a little bit better. One thing that's really slick, if you've never seen it, Google Lightboard sometime. For technical disciplines or anything that's chalkboard intensive, this is a really nice way to approach, and a lot of schools are building these. We just built one here. And so I would be happy to share more information or links with you with that if you are interested. A couple last questions, last thoughts. What apps do I need if I'm building video content? One of the things I recommend that you check out is PowerPoint Mix. It allows you to do a lot more with your PowerPoint than traditionally people have been able to do. For me, I use Camtasia for all of my video content. Others use Doceri or Record Everything. There's a number of different apps that are out there, and just kind of look and see, what's the input time, what's it going to be. What length is good? I have found that 6 to 10 minutes, and there's a little bit of research that supports this idea. Students have a hard time paying attention for a 30-minute lecture, and what I've seen is Is it if it's 30 minutes long, oh, that's overwhelming, I'm just going to watch YouTube. If it's 2 or 3 minutes, that's probably not that important, I'm not going to bother with it. So hitting this kind of window is nice. Last question, does it have to be perfect? And I'm a total perfectionist with my videos, but I will warn you, this can be a real time sink. And so if you can be comfortable with using something available from somebody else, something that's pre-existing, then great. If you can do it without stressing over how you look or how you sound or every little detail, you may have more free time for yourself. Definitely flipping is something that takes a real commitment of time and effort, but I think there's things that you can also do to make it easier. Last point, where can I get more, next to last point, where can I get more ideas? If you have not seen them, I recommend that you check out the Macmillan communities. These span a whole lot of different disciplines, and even if you're not a chemist, check out Flipped Chemistry. This is the site that I'm editor for, and we do a lot of active learning type stuff. So even if you're not a chemist, you may find some links to different learning approaches or in-class strategies helpful here. So you're welcome to join. Coming up later this year, there's a Flipped Learning Conference at the University of Northern Colorado. This is a 3-day conference where you can share ideas if you're interested in sharing, or gain ideas from experts across the field. And this is a multidisciplinary conference, so probably a lot for everybody, not just STEM, but all sorts of liberal arts and music and art and then STEM as well. Finally, can I do this in small bites? I would say absolutely, and I would encourage you to. If you are starting into this, pick one thing, pick one class, one segment that you can work with, and see if you can figure out how to build content for one piece. I think a lot of times people jump into flipped learning and then jump back out because it's so much work. But if you can focus on one chapter that you can flip, that maybe would lend itself well to this, what it does is it carves out enough time for you to build more active learning throughout the semester, and it gives you a chance to kind of get good at it, figure out what you like and what you don't like without being completely married to it for a whole course, which can be very challenging. Okay, I think that's kind of all I've got on this end, and I know we're running close on time. Do we have any questions as we kind of wrap up?
Yes, we do. What do you do with students who consistently don't watch the videos?
That is a good question, and it's something that I have had a hard time policing because I do the thing with either read or watch. I don't necessarily have a good way of monitoring whether or not every single student is watching the videos. If you are determined to have students watch the videos, there are several different software tools where you can embed questions into the videos, and those really enforce, kind of drive people to watch them. Camtasia has an app like that. There have been a couple out. I think there was a group called ed.ted that I think is defunct now that had done this. There are several others that I may not be familiar with right this minute that will build the quizzing right into that. For me, I do that pre-class quiz that effectively serves, maybe not as an absolute did you watch the video, but it definitely drives people to watch the video because they should be able to get the questions right if they watch it, and hopefully, maybe not hopefully, but it's likely that they'll struggle if they don't. So that's been my approach, but it's an imperfect approach.
Okay, I do have another question. What program is being used to put questions within the lecture online?
That's a similar question. So I know Camtasia does that, and I have another couple that do that. If that person wants to, if you want to drop me an email, you can just Google me at Murray State and drop me an email. I have a list that I'll be happy to send you. I don't have them up right in front of me, and I'm not super familiar with all of them, but I've seen 3 or 4 or 5 that do that.
Okay, and there's another question. A typical class for me is 50 minutes. how can I make 50 minutes to 10 minutes?
In terms of the lecture content? Yeah, okay, that's a funny question, and it is actually really surprising. What I have found is that when I move my content from lecture to video, the amount of time that I am covering compresses, that I'm requiring compresses down a lot. Now, this partially depends on how you approach this. Especially if you script it out, because anytime we talk, we tend to meander. I mean, I'm doing it now, but searching for the right word or trying to say something or restating something. And if you do a video, what you do is you either script it so that you know what you're going to say ahead of time, or you have the ability to go back through and say, okay, I wandered in circles there for 3 minutes trying to find the right thing to say. I'm going to go ahead and just trim that out. And so what I've found is I trim my time about in half. A lot of your lecture time is, hey, how's everybody doing? Let's make sure we're right here. Why is this projector not working? Where did the chalk go? A lot of these little questions tend to pop up that you can eliminate with the video content. I would also say that if you've got 50 minutes of lecture material, I'm not saying it has to be 10 minutes, but I would say do your videos in 10-minute pieces. So sometimes I'll say, okay, you've got 30 minutes of video lessons, but there's 3 different 10-minute chunks, and that just it gives you more flexibility if you want to use it in later years. If your sequence changes a little bit, or your class order breaks up, you might say, okay, we're going to do these 2 today, and then I'm going to push the next one back to Monday or something like that. So I think it's good in terms of flexibility, both for you and the students, to have it in smaller chunks where you can.
What is your percentage of passing students with this method?
I have had a pass rate typically running around 90%, and my we use standardized tests to assess, and so that's without a drop in standardized test scores.
Okay. Do you have any tips for faculty buy-in? They've been trying flipping the class for some time, but some people are, they've been teaching a long time, and even if their attrition is high and retention is low, tenure speaks.
So, will you ask me that question one more time? I'm sorry, Rhonda. Let me.
Sure, and I'm not sure I articulated it that well. I think she's looking for tips on how to get faculty buy-in to try this approach. It sounds like they've been trying to flip the classroom, but some academics have been teaching for a long time, even though the attrition is high and retention is low. They're spending their time on the tenure track. So,
and that's a challenge intrinsic, I think, to tenure. Sometimes is there's just not that sort of ability to really push that, and so it becomes one of persuasion and not compulsion. We have people who are not going to go this way, and I'm aware of that. So what we've tried to do is to really stress it with incoming faculty, and to build a culture where it's more and more expected among younger faculty, or maybe a better word is to say untenured faculty. So it's a new faculty coming in, and really try to build a culture where everybody's at least aware of this or building this. And it does tend to look different from discipline to discipline. Even within the department, you may have very different approaches, and I think that's okay.
Okay, great. This is just a comment. I have used Kaltura for lectures, and the students love being able to rewatch, especially for difficult content.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing I did not mention, but the first time I did a video, it was just a lecture recording. I was still doing traditional lecture, but I was just recording. I had a lot of international students in my class, and what I found was that those students had watched as much as 60 hours of replay of my videos, and it was just lecture. I mean, it wasn't all that dynamic or anything, but they were they got to where I couldn't say good evening without hands going up. Wait, wait, wait! You're not recording. So that's, I think, a major advantage, especially if you're dealing with students for whom English is not a first language.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is our final question. How do you deal with administrators who want you to review the material that was in the video for students who don't watch them? So maybe you don't have administrative buy-in, I guess, to the approach.
I have not encountered that. I'm an administrator as well as a teacher, so I've got my own Darth Vader suit. But I have not encountered that one. I would say, I think as long as you are making video content available to students, and I would say, plan on making it available after class as well. With the graph that I showed of students watching the videos, I'm not at 100% viewing before class, but I think, with those videos coming in right before exams, they're going to see it, and most administrators, I think, will be reasonable with that.
Yeah, and one final comment. I love the flipped classroom approach and has worked beautifully with most students for the most part. So that's good.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate everybody joining today, and really it's an honor to be able to present this. If you have any further questions, if you or anything, if you like the speed drill template, I'm happy to send that to you. So you can reach me at Murray State directly, and then Rhonda can handle any questions about anything related to Macmillan as well.
Yeah, great. We're over time, so just want to say thank you so much to you, Kevin, for a great presentation, and thanks for everyone who's hung on out there, and we will be sending you a recording of the presentation. So thanks, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, y'all. Thanks.
Bye-bye.